Hey, how's it going, guys? This is Brody Lowe, and today we're going to go through the 57 games I completed in 2023. I originally had a mission of completing 52 games. That was going to be one per week. I exceeded that goal by 5 games, something that I tried to do in 2021 but came up short at only 40 games, if you can imagine playing that low amount of games in a year. Nonetheless, it's something I picked back up this year, tackled it with a lot more discipline, intentionality, I would say, on games I would play. I would pick anything from shorter games to medium size, but there's also some lengthy games on here as well. In the spirit of completing a backlog, there are some titles that had save files from way before this 2023 had started, so I do allow myself to add those to the list as well, because this is all about completing a backlog anyway, and those are the games that are actually on my backlog. We're gonna go through from January 1st through December. All of these games are in the order that I beat them. I'm gonna place it in a category of S through F. I think an S is a masterpiece game. There's not gonna be very many games in that category. Otherwise, you don't wanna dilute the S rank. A is for amazing games. These are standout titles, probably be top 25 all time, maybe top 40, depending on how many games I start adding to the A tier. B is gonna be your more commonly great games. Several B tier games come out every year, kind of like your high 8s. C is going to be your good to average games. Maybe there's some big flaws, maybe there's some things holding it back from being higher. D, of course, is more mediocre, barely passing, and F is just terrible. There's not too many F tier games that I complete, so we're gonna have a nice bell curve today, evenly distributed data. Anyways, let's get started. The first one we're gonna talk about is Warhammer Space Marine. This came out in 2011. I played the PC version. This was my first introduction to anything Warhammer related. I've seen the figurines and I've heard people talk about it. It seems like there's quite a bit of video games, and there's Warhammer, and then there's also Warhammer 40K, which are two different things, but they're kind of the same thing. I don't know anything about it. I've heard good things about Warhammer Space Marine, and I had seen the trailer for the sequel that's coming out next year. I decided to give this a run, and I absolutely loved it. I think it took me about 10 hours to beat on normal. It was a great mixture of melee and gun combat. You're shooting orcs in the face, and you're using your chainsaw to rip through them and get some health back. The enemies were just a lot of fun to kill, because they reminded me of almost like the Covenant in Halo, because they're constantly shouting like "Space Marines, we're after you," and all these like British accents, and it's just crazy and really funny and really fun to play this game. I really like Warhammer Space Marine. I'm excited for the sequel and more games in that series, and maybe it's something I could get into later on, but I don't know if I have the patience or the artistic fortitude to paint those figurines, so probably not. This is Panzer Dragoon Remake. This is a remake of the original game on Sega Saturn. I think it was a launch title for the Sega Saturn. Just an on-rail shooter, kind of like Star Fox, but without the level selection complexity, and a little more simplified kind of arcade experience. I was never able to beat it. It's actually kind of brutal with its continue system. It's kind of exhausting to play. This one's definitely easier, more forgiving, and I was able to complete it in probably a 2-hour sitting. It's awesome. If you've never played Panzer Dragoon, I'd highly recommend checking out the remake. You can probably get it really cheap on all platforms. I mean, it didn't do much for me as a game. I mean, it's a pretty short experience. It's a faithful remake. I feel good putting it in the C category. This is Serious Sam, the first encounter. This is the first Serious Sam game. I played the HD version from 2009. This was essentially just a shooting gallery. All the game's levels are a series of areas and arenas, tons of enemies coming at you. Pretty repetitive. I don't really think it's a bad thing, but there's really not much here. Not really any kind of creative level design going on, or story that I really gave a shit about. I mean, it's just a very dumb kind of game. It's aware of itself. It doesn't really take itself that seriously. If you're looking for just a game to fire up and start shooting things, this is pretty solid. I had a good time with it. I'll put it in C. All right, coming up next, this is a bit of an oddball, okay? I counted this one because I had just a couple trophies left on Monopoly Plus on PS4. I think one of them was completing a trade that completed 2 color sets simultaneously. So I decided to go in and just get that final trophy of completing the 2 colored match sets. But hey, I reached 100% completion on PSN. I'm going to count it in the spirit of completing 52 games. I think that's fine. As far as Monopoly games go, this is as streamlined, simple, straightforward Monopoly experience as you could want. This is the way I would want to play Monopoly with people. I wouldn't want to whip out the board game and start counting money. It would just take 5 hours to play a game that you can play in an hour and a half. I'm going to put it in C category. It doesn't really do anything to push the Monopoly genre forward or anything like that. Okay, coming up next, this is Transformers Devastation. I played the PlayStation 4 version. I think it was free on PlayStation Plus. Either that or I got it really cheap because I'm not really that into Transformers, to be honest. Transformers and G.I. Joe and Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles to a lesser extent. I think I was a little too young for them. I was more into Dragon Ball Z and stuff like that. This game's awesome though. I think what this game has going for it, it shares a combat system very similar to Bayonetta, although it doesn't have nearly the amount of satisfying combos that I found. What is cool about this game though is you can play as many different Transformers characters. I only played through it one time. I don't even remember who I was playing as. May have been switching around. Definitely a game that was made for Transformers fans, which I'm not one, so it's probably a B game for those guys, but for me it was a C. Another remake, but this time it's for a game that I absolutely love, Tony Hawk Pro Skater 1 and 2. I played the N64 versions originally. I had a very watered down experience, but I still loved it as a kid. It was great to go back to those levels, have this kind of polished experience where you're still upgrading your skater and upgrading your board. You can kind of use the same character between both games. It kind of made it into one holistic experience. This is the best way to play the Tony Hawk Pro Skater games now, absolutely. I hope they make it 3 and 4. I'm not sure if they've said anything about that, but those games are amazing as well. It'd be awesome to see remakes of those because the levels just get crazy in Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 3 and 4. I'm going to put it in the A category. Hogwarts Legacy. I had a great time with this game. I thought this game captured the spirit of Hogwarts and Hogsmeade, particularly the movies, because that's really all I know. I don't really know the books that well. I've only read the first one when I was a kid. The idea of like this wizard and witch school, it's prime time for video games. Making our own character, going to Hogwarts, I think that's something we all wanted as Harry Potter fans. I think they delivered on it. The combat is kind of weak. All the areas outside of Hogwarts aren't really that great. There's no Quidditch. It's kind of a bare bones game. After you've played it for about 30 hours, you realize, okay, there's not much going on here. After you've completed your initial exploration and wonder as a Hogwarts or Harry Potter fan and it becomes just a video game, it's not as good as, when you first start playing it. I had a great time with it. I think it still sits in B for me just because I am a fan of that universe. Kind of the inverse of what happened with Transformers Devastation. This is Dusk, the first game in a genre that I end up going back to several times this year, and that is the boomer shooter genre on PC. I've become quite a big fan of these games. I actually really love playing on mouse keyboard. Controller is fine if I have to use it, if it's like a console only game. If I have the option to play a game on PC with mouse keyboard, first person shooter, that's usually where I'm going to go. And I'm glad I did because this game was it was nostalgic and genre defining all at the same time. It looked a lot like Turok, maybe a little bit of Hexen, like old polygonal graphics, but it looked good. It wasn't jarring on the eyes. It was still high resolution and modern. And then they just combined the very classic Doom, like finding the colored keys. We're going to have metal music playing in the background. It didn't really do much with the formula. I remembered every single level. I had fun. There was a lot of variety in the level, and the weapons I felt like it was giving to me at the right times. The story was kind of neat and weird. Dusk is a great game. Definitely want to go back to now that they have the HD port. Nonetheless, let's keep going and we'll go ahead and put Dusk in the A category. Wolfenstein II. This is another first-person shooter. I was kind of thinking, okay, well, it's more modern. It's not a boomer shooter, but it's literally a Wolfenstein game. We're collecting armor. We're collecting health. Kind of has some of these old school tropes, but it has an amazing modern storytelling element to it. This game is crazy. I mean, the places that it takes us with the Nazis going to Mars, how they're surviving on the submarine, doing all this crazy shit and bringing their friends back to life. It does not make any sense and it goes off the rails pretty much in the first scene. It embraces it because it's so over the top violent. Something I definitely want to replay. I probably will go back to the original, the New Order and start there again because I've played actually I haven't played Youngblood. Maybe I'll play that first. I do have some small gripes with them. I think sometimes it's hard to find what you're supposed to do, like what lever you're supposed to push somewhere. It's not always obvious like where your objective is. There is a lot of time spent kind of wandering around, more so than I find in other first-person shooter games. So I'm not sure what's going on, if it's me or if it's the game or if other people are having that issue. Maybe let me know in the comments below. We'll put that in the B category for now. Resident Evil 2 Remake. I think this is the first Resident Evil game that I've actually completed. I've played bits and pieces of 1, 4, back on the original hardware. I'm like 25% of the way through Resident Evil 7. I still need to go back and finish that. I don't know what it is about survival horror. Amnesia is something that I've started several times and never get through. The Evil Within, I finally went through all of it. Until Dawn, I started several times and never stick with it. Maybe it's just something about, it's not that fun to play horror games when you're not really scared by them. And I'm not trying to sound like a macho guy. I've seen it all, man. I think PT and Outlast were really fucking scary. Once I played through those, it was kind of like, okay. I didn't really have that problem with Resident Evil 2. I thought the story was on point. Gameplay is amazing. I love how slow the zombies walk towards you and how many bullets it takes to kill them. There's certain situations that you don't want to waste ammo on. You find yourself kind of making these decisions like to run away or hide and things like that. And Mr. X running around the police department always added this tension. Anytime you were trying to find a key, Mr. X would pop out of nowhere and scare the shit out of you. Definitely an exciting game, and I actually have memories of seeing some friends play the old one. This may have been the first Resident Evil game I ever saw. It was really cool to go to this game and play it in this way. Definitely gonna play Resident Evil 3 and 4 Remake very soon, and we're gonna put this in the A category. All right, coming up, the first JRPG that we completed for the year. This is something that I've been playing off and on for a couple years. I had never played a game in this franchise before, so this was my first foray into Shin Megami Tensei, and I started with Nocturne. Might be crazy after reading more about some of the other games, because this is supposed to be one of the hardest ones. It absolutely was hard. I think my play time was like 67 hours. I've always said, like, in JRPGs, your play clock doesn't really tell you how long you've actually been playing the game. Think about all the times you die. You may lose 30 minutes here, 15 minutes there. Especially in this game, you die a lot. I don't remember dying this much, you know, probably in all the Final Fantasy games I've played combined. And that's because this game's combat has a very severe, you know, reward and punishment system around the elemental weaknesses. If you end up exploiting an elemental weakness, you'll get an extra turn. Gives you another chance to again exploit the same weakness. Huge damage. At the same time, you don't want to go into battle with the wrong type of demon selected. Definitely use a guide when playing this game, because the fusion system, super complicated. It's fun capturing the demons and convincing them to join your party. The labyrinth levels, I eventually got Dante from Devil May Cry in my party, which I thought was cool. I absolutely love this game. Probably the most hardcore JRPG experience I've played outside of a Souls game. Shin Megami Tensei Nocturne, definitely an A-tier game that has me excited to play more of the series. I'm actually I'm playing through Persona 3 right now. This is going to be the first co-op game that we've played of Gears of War. We had done Gears of War 1 on PC a couple years ago. They don't have Gears of War 2, 3, or Judgment remastered. You can only play them the 360 versions, you know, back compat. So that's what we did. I love this game. A lot of charm. I thought was much better than the first, you know, had a better story and felt like the environments had a lot of really cool visuals. I just never really knew what was going to happen next, even though all you really end up doing is just killing a bunch of locusts. I do have some small gripes with it. I think the enemies and the allies look too similar sometimes. Like the locusts and the gears are very bulky, and sometimes, a lot of times I'm shooting the wrong teammates or something like that. So maybe that's just again on me. Definitely a B tier game in the best way. Now, this is another save file that I went back to from many years ago. Fallout 4. I was big on this game in 2015 when it came out. I think I got too caught up in some of the side content, settlements, and chasing those guys around. I just burned out. I didn't really realize that I was only a few missions away from completing the main campaign. Something that I found in this challenge is once I beat a game, I kind of got this rush. Oh man, I just beat Gears of War 2. Like, I want to beat another game quick as possible. Line up a bunch of backlog games like one after another. That was very satisfying to just kind of go through my old trophies, my old save files, just start knocking some of this stuff out that I had abandoned. That's what this game and the next several games are going to be. Fallout 4, not my favorite. I think it lacks a lot of the variety and dynamic dialogue options. I mean, you basically just have the good option, the bad option, and the kind of option, you know, or not saying anything at all. I felt like in Fallout 3 there were so many options. If I leveled up my speech and intelligence, I would have different ways that I could influence the quest line and the NPCs, and I just didn't really find a lot of that in Fallout 4. The base building and settlements were very tedious. I actually felt like the weapon modification got really boring. It just added a lot of busy work. I'm gonna put it in B because it's still a really good game. I think it has some really cool levels. Side quests are pretty interesting, but I think Fallout 3 and New Vegas are just way better than Fallout 4. This is Infamous Second Son. This was actually the first Infamous game that I had played. I thought it was okay. It was fun gathering the different powers and, you know, seeing what you could do with them. As soon as enemies came on the screen, it was time to fight. I never really had fun with the combat. I didn't really find the characters all that interesting, and the story was just kind of whatever to me. It was a game that I put down, you know, basically towards the end, and just never really felt compelled to go back. It felt about the same as where I left it. I'm glad that I went through and cleared it off, but I'll still put it in C. All right, this is a weird one, but this is Dynasty Warriors Gundam. Very random title that I started playing a few years ago. I mean, it was cool and it functioned as a podcast, you know, kind of background type of game. Not much thought, but I'd put that in the D category for sure. LA Noire. This was one of the first games I played on my PS3. I got my PS3 like late 2012, early 2013, really late. This game appealed to me because I'd always been into that kind of classic detective movie vibe. This is definitely a period piece. If you're into that post-World War II era of Los Angeles and doing detective type work, this is a good adventure game. There's some action in it, you know, some gunfight sequences, but I actually thought those all really sucked. I thought that driving the car around was not very good either. But once you were investigating crime scenes and questioning the witnesses, building up your case, I thought that was all handled very well. There's some really cool technology they use in the game to capture the faces of the actors. Definitely a cool game. I'm gonna put it in B. Let's talk about Final Fantasy IX. This game I started probably 7 years ago. I played it primarily on the Vita, but this was before the current remasters had come out. They allow you to like skip random battles and speed the game up. I didn't have any of those abilities. I essentially just played the PS1 port. Nevertheless, this game's amazing. I thought the story was fantastic. The characters were all super likable. Felt like everyone had a nice arc. It was a really strong party of characters together. The main villain, I think, is one of the most interesting main villains. There's a lot of gray area and, you know, things to be sympathetic towards. The combat system is great. You know, it's the similar active time battle that we see in like Final Fantasy VII, Final Fantasy VI. What's cool about this one is that you equip different items on your party members, like jewels and helmets and things like that. And there's different skills attached to equipment. It behooves you to change your equipment around a lot and teach different skills. Once they learn the skill, it's permanent. Definitely a good game that I'll probably go back to and play the remaster versions and maybe go for a platinum trophy or something like that. Or if they just did like a full-on remake the way they're doing Final Fantasy VII, would be cool, but I don't really think it's as necessary. I don't think there's as big of this like galactic spectacle that Final Fantasy VII had. That being said, it's definitely going in the A category. Okay, Ghostwire Tokyo. This is one of the most unique games I've played this year. It's not something I did 100%. I kind of mainlined it and just did a few of the side quests. I found it to be very fun and unique. It had a nice like Japanese charm. This was actually set in Tokyo. You're running around Tokyo rescuing everybody's souls. There's like this first person shooter, but you were using magic. It has the mechanics of like a gun game, but there's no guns at all. I kind of got a little bit bored. I could feel myself starting to not be that into the combat about halfway through my playthrough. That might have something to do with me not 100%ing it. Definitely a game I could see myself going back to. I'll still put it in B because I thought it was very creative. Okay, next up, this is another open world game. This is Horizon Forbidden West. I was a really big fan of the first game. I thought the first game had a really weird, strange premise, but it drew me in. I wanted to know what Aloy, what her origin was, where she came from, why she has these abilities, what these machines are. The first game answers all of that in a really cool way. I think for the sequel, it starts to answer questions that I wasn't really asking. Then I actually find out I'm not really that even into the world. Aloy kind of becomes a bitch. It's very grating, and she's kind of an asshole to people. Kind of annoying, but as a game, it's very, very beautiful, very solid gameplay. They improved a lot of things, but I just didn't really find the story or the writing or Aloy's character arc to be very interesting at all. So I could be wrong. It may just be I wasn't in the mood for the game and it might be better on the replay. It's definitely something I want to go back to and get the platinum just to maybe see the rest of the game through and give it a fair shot. My first impression was it's a very high quality game that had some choices that weren't really up my alley. So I'll still put it in B. Maybe it could go up to an A in the future if I play it again. Okay, next up, this is Warhammer 40k Boltgun. This was a new release that I bought on launch. It's a boomer shooter. This game was amazing. It captured what I liked about the first Warhammer game, which was its world, how loyal and devoted the Space Marines were to the Emperor. It combined the gameplay elements that I love from the boomer shooter genre. Very snappy and crunchy sound effects, satisfying levels. There's some really cool melee. There's a taunt button to taunt your enemies, and there's just so many different lines of dialogue for that alone. And they set out to make a badass, cool kind of 90s era, early 2000s era shooter, and I think they succeeded. For me, it's gonna go in B. Gran Turismo 7. This is one of my all-time favorite game series. Not much of a car guy, and I'm not really much of a racing guy, but there's just something about the Gran Turismo games that have always appealed to me. I think it's because when I was a kid, one of my neighbor friends was really into cars, really into this game, and he would bring it over and show me his account, or I guess just his profile on his memory card at the time. I'm not kidding, had about $10 trillion, and he may have used the Game Shark or cheated looking back on it. I don't know, this kid, all he did was play this game, so it wouldn't surprise me if he like earned that much money from playing the game, or maybe it was $10 billion. I was drawn to it because the idea of winning races and buying those car parts, souping up your car, it just turned it all into a big car RPG. Gran Turismo 7 takes that exact same formula, builds upon it, improves upon it. They make the campaign all about collecting different cars. You'll have a series of races with, let's say, like this set of cars from the 80s Toyotas, or mid 90s BMWs, whatever it is. Kind of takes you through the different eras of racing, why different car companies were important. It got a lot of history and intrigue if you're into racing. So for me, Gran Turismo 7 goes in the A category. Final Fantasy 16. Right off the bat, I'm just gonna say Final Fantasy 16 is my favorite game of 2023. It is my game of the year. I think this game is incredible. Everything from the characters, the dialogue, main character or side character dialogue, it's all great. The music, the story beats, the boss battles. This just feels like a massive game in a way that, we get massive games with big maps, right? But the story beats and the length of time that this game takes place over, it feels like one of those old JRPGs from the 90s. When you're done playing, you're just like, man, it just stays with you. That's what this game did to me. It's definitely more of an action game than it is an RPG. You're not really doing any customization of party members. You're only worried about Clive. What this game sets out to do, I think they accomplish it. A must play, an S tier game. This is Medal of Honor. I wanted to play an FPS game. I think those are great palate cleansers for, after playing a long RPG like Final Fantasy 16. I was surprised with how well this held up. The control scheme is very modern. Actually, I think this might be one of the first games to use dual analog sticks. I thought the level design and all the different challenges you do and ways that you're using your passport and sneaking around the Nazis, it's very creative and not just running around killing things constantly. Like there was missions and objectives and sabotage. I really felt like I was behind enemy lines. I played Medal of Honor Underground a couple years ago, and this is about the same. I think it's a really good game to go back to. It holds up, but it doesn't do anything too crazy, as far as its gameplay and story. We'll just put that in C category. Okay, let's talk about Diablo 4. I know this is a controversial game for some people, but I had a really good time with it. As someone who doesn't get super crazy into the Diablo games, I think this game was great. I played it with my brother and several friends, and we were all into it. Played as the Necromancer class, which I thought was really fun. I had never played a Necromancer before. This game is just a lot better than Diablo 3 in my opinion. I think the map, I think the art style, I think the story, just the overall aesthetic of the game is what we want out of Diablo. Diablo 3 is very cartoonish and just weird looking. I'm a big fan of it. I think it's an A tier game. Really good writing, really cool voice acting and music. It's definitely underrated, and I think it has some weird season pass like monetization choices that people don't like. But if you don't look at that and just look at kind of the main campaign and what that offering is, I think it's really cool. Medal of Honor Allied Assault on PC. This was the first Medal of Honor game that I had as a kid, and I got this for like $10. I played it on an old computer, probably had 10 gigabytes of storage on it, setting it to low settings and it barely running. I had the wonderful time. I remember going through D-Day and never really completing the game because my PC barely ran it. It was awesome to finally go through something that I had as a kid but I never finished. This was my favorite Medal of Honor game, absolutely. I think it has the best variety of levels, best challenge. Some of the other ones were pretty easy. That being said, it's still not like anything amazing. I don't think it's as good as like Boltgun or Wolfenstein II or any of those games, but it's definitely the best C tier Medal of Honor game. All right, coming up, this is another FPS game, this time on PC, Singularity. Sort of this Cold War espionage, time travel, kind of a physics shooter, if you will. I don't remember a whole lot of it, actually. The story was almost too complicated to remember any of it. I just remember it's a time travel story, and you have a choice at the end if you want to kill X amount of people, and I don't even remember what I chose. Maybe that's on me for playing too many games in a short amount of time. Maybe something I go back to and play again on like hard difficulty. I'm going to put it in C. Okay, next up, this is Journey, a game that was originally on PS3. I played the PS4 version. This was a beautiful 2-hour game. I believe this won Game of the Year from several outlets when it first came out, which I think is kind of crazy, but maybe it just came out in a year where there wasn't that many great games. That's not a knock on this game. I think it's one of the most beautiful games I've ever played, but it didn't really hit me the way that people talk about it. I don't know if it's just I've heard too much about it. Maybe I was expecting an experience too much to even have an experience. I'm not sure. But for what it is, I think it's definitely worth playing. It's a high quality visual audio experience. Maybe someone who doesn't play games would really appreciate. For me, it's a B, but I can see why people rate it a lot higher. Okay, let's talk about Remnant from the Ashes. I played this game in preparation for the second game, which I still haven't gotten to. I thought that the combat was really tight and combined sort of Souls elements with gunplay in a way that I didn't really think would work, but it ended up being really cool. I don't like how everything is procedurally generated, though. I think I would have much preferred them to just make a game, like make levels. I don't know if they were just really trying to make this a multiplayer kind of Destiny game at the same time they were making a Souls game. I think it would have been cooler to see what they could do with level design, just craft an experience from start to finish. It may have been a little bit stronger. For me, it was still a B tier game. Ratchet and Clank Future A Crack in Time. A little bit disappointing, honestly. I still think it was really good, but I've heard so many people rave about this game, it being probably the best Ratchet and Clank game. I don't even think this game is better than Tools of Destruction. I don't like how often Ratchet and Clank are separated from each other. I didn't really care for the Zony or the Great Clock or Clank's bigger purpose. I just didn't really think that was necessary. I thought it was cooler that Clank was just some robot that ran into Ratchet. That's kind of what made those characters so appealing from, you know, the original series. I'm not really big on the Ratchet and Clank Future games, to be honest. I still think they're good. It still plays nicely. For me, it's like a B-. As soon as I was done with it, I didn't feel compelled to 100% complete it, which for a Ratchet and Clank game, that's not good. LittleBigPlanet Karting. This was just a random game that I decided to play through. I thought I could do it in a short amount of time. And I like kart racers. It was a nice way to change things up a bit, play a racing title. LittleBigPlanet Karting, not my favorite kart racer. It's not a kart racer I'll probably ever go back to. It's not that anything was necessarily wrong with it. It's just I just don't really care about LittleBigPlanet that much. Aesthetically, it doesn't really appeal to me. The game runs at, 25 frames. It doesn't really run that well. It's janky, not in like a fun way. Like I like some jank every now and then. I think like the Sonic racing games are much better. I think Crash Team Racing is far better. It's a D for me. ABZU. So this game is a lot like Journey, except you're underwater. It's not as good as Journey, but it's still pretty cool swimming around and seeing some sea creatures for an hour and a half, 2 hours, which it took to play the game. For the sake of doing a challenge like this, it's good to do, but maybe a one-time check it out type experience. Like if you have it in your library, maybe just download it and swim around for 10 minutes and see if you feel something. C. All right, another Medal of Honor. This one I think is probably as good as Allied Assault, if not maybe a little bit less. Very much the same as the other Medal of Honor games. It's good. C. All right, let's go back to the old save file bin. Okay, this is probably the oldest save file of any game I completed this year, and that's Elder Scrolls 4 Oblivion. I played this game back in 2012 on probably a $500 laptop I got at Office Max. I was like, hey, let me just download Steam. I think I saw Oblivion for like $5, and I was like, all right, let me just try this and see if it works. And it ran pretty decently on that laptop. They definitely need to remake it. I felt like the combat does not hold up at all. Navigating, like just picking a quest to track was like pulling teeth. I know a lot of people love this game. I think it's really good still because it has that Bethesda formula and It has a really good Thieves Guild quest line. The main quest line is pretty solid. I loaded up my save file, realized I was just a few missions away from completing it, ran to the end, glad I finished and knocked it off the list. Not my favorite Bethesda game, still a Bethesda game, so it belongs in B. Okay, let's talk about a Bethesda game I really love, and that's Fallout 3. I did not go back to an old save file. I just decided to make a new save file and mainline the main story, which I had never really done in a Fallout game. I've probably played it for 40 or 50 hours prior on old accounts on 360, PS3, but never really beat the game. I wanted to just see what the main story was all about, have like a proper playthrough of the game, I guess. But after having played through the main story, I'm like, well, maybe I kind of want to do everything else now. So Fallout 3 is something that I beat it for this challenge, but I actually feel like that there's a lot of unfinished business there for me, and that has me excited. So I'm going to put it in A. Let's continue the co-op journey with my buddy Josh. We moved on to Gears of War 3 after 2. I loved this one. This was my favorite Gears of War game so far. I felt like they got the gun mechanics down. I think they got the pacing of the levels down. The story. This is the game that made me realize I was attached to the characters. I cared about what happened to them. They figured out the sponginess of the enemies on this one. On the first 2 games, I felt like I was just unloading clip after clip after clip into some of these locusts, and they just wouldn't go down. This game doesn't really have that as much from what I remember. There was a lot more variety in the levels and, you know, getting on vehicles and turrets and split missions. This is as good as it gets in the Gears of War series. I still don't rank it as high as A tier games, but I think it's probably at the top of B. So it's like an 88 or something like that if we want to start splitting hairs. This one is called a Medieval, and this is a little bit different in that it's a magic shooter. So we're playing as a mage. Think of this as like a hyped up Hexen game on steroids. I felt like this game had really solid, challenging levels and cool enemies. I don't think it was as memorable or good as Dusk. Still a very strong boomer shooter, so I will still put it in B. Okay, next up, this is Bulletstorm. This was the full clip edition. I played it on PC. This game was pretty good. There were some things about the main character that were just really annoying to me. I felt like the story was complete nonsense. This game is essentially just a really flashy, violent kill 'em up. If you just want to start killing enemies and doing some cool shit, give no fuck attitude protagonist, kind of like Duke Nukem, this is definitely a game for you. It's not gonna move you or rock your socks off or blow you away with any of its design, anything like that. It's just gonna be a fun kill 'em up for about 8 hours. Okay, let's talk about a game that does have a little more intrigue. That was The Darkness. I had heard a lot about this game from some friends of mine. It always comes up in like underrated games lists, so it was really cool to finally play it. It has a lot of things going for it that appeal to me. You know, I'm really into mafia stuff. I think the immersive sim genre is really cool. I want to play more games from that genre. And this game is very immersive sim light. Like, it's not really heavy on some of those elements like Deus Ex would be, but it feels like kindred with some of those games like BioShock and Dishonored and stuff like that. I really enjoyed having all the different powers. Just the story just kept me going from beat to beat. There was these really cool like documentary style sections with the main character where game would be loading and the main character's kind of like giving you some backstory. A lot of personality in The Darkness. Definitely worth checking out. The 360 version is definitely the way to play it because there is no PC port. We're gonna put that in B. All right, let's talk about Starfield. This was a huge mixed reaction game. I think people really loved it at first, and as they played it, they realized it wasn't that good. I can understand that. I put about 40 hours into it. I did the main quest, did a few of the faction quest lines, kind of was ready to put it down. I don't have really the strongest PC, so I was running it in like, you know, medium settings, 1080p. I was still getting, you know, 60 frames. I had several crashes and weird janky things happen to me, but I think this is a great Bethesda game. It's definitely a lot better than Fallout 4. Takes us back to all of the amazing dialogue that we saw in Fallout 3. It plays a lot like Fallout 3, it really does, with the speech mechanics and how you level up and stuff like that. It's very Fallout, but in space. And there's also some supernatural elements akin to Skyrim in the game, which I was not expecting. I think it's great. I put it down knowing that they were probably going to patch it and tweak it more. It's definitely something I'll go back to. I could see myself going for all the achievements, the Steam achievements in the game. I probably need to beef up my graphics card a little bit more if I want to go back to it. So for me, it's an A game. There's still some flaws. Like, I think the exploration is really boring. There's way too many planets. There's way too much like loading screens when the fast travel. It doesn't have that like wander around and find stuff element that we see in like Fallout and Skyrim, but I think the game makes up for it in having really deep space mechanic systems that would be exclusive to a space game. They're going for it. I don't think the game is done yet. For me, it's just gonna sit at A because I actually just really like the vision. Okay, let's talk about the only game that I hated this year, and that was Rise Son of Rome. I remember seeing previews for this when the Xbox One was launching. Some people were really high on it, but I could immediately tell there was something off about the combat. Every time I saw the game, it was like a slow motion still, and then you're selecting like blue or yellow for, you know, whatever icon shows up on the enemy. I felt like that's all I saw of the game when, you know, there was previews of gameplay. Sure enough, when you play the game, every 10 seconds you are going into a slow motion animation and then playing Simon Says. And it just got so monotonous and annoying to me. It was not really hard at all. You know, even if you crank the difficulty up, you're just making the game even more annoying at that point. It doesn't make it more fun. Even using some of the ranged weapons, all you do is hold the left trigger, it automatically locks on, and then you just let go whenever it tells you to. The game has so many quick time events baked into the combat that you're just banging your head against the wall. Maybe some people don't feel that way about the combat. They like how dumb and simple it is. To me, there was no flow state, there was no like dynamics or builds or anything to make it more fun and interesting. Thank God the game was only 6 hours or so, because I was just so fed up with it. The final segment of the game, I kid you not, is about 15 quick time events in a row. It is so fucking aggravating. High budget, pretty game, but still a fucking polished turd, so it goes right into F. This is Quantum Break. This was another Xbox exclusive a little bit later in the console, I think 2015 time frame. This came from Remedy Studios. They made Alan Wake, then they later made Control. This game is kind of related to those games from what I've heard. This was pretty cool. It's a time travel, time dilation, plot hole type of game. If you're into time travel thrillers, this is right up your alley. They're using a lot of actors that you might recognize in movies. Nobody really that big. They have like the Iceman from X-Men. They have Peter Baelish from Game of Thrones. I felt like the game tries too hard to be a TV show, and when it tries to be a game, it doesn't really try that hard. Combat sections were fine, like the gun mechanics were fine, like you can slow down time and do some cool things with time. The game has so many of these platforming sections, moving boards and climbing ladders, slows the game down so much. And then they throw in these TV episodes with real actors that I didn't find any relevance. I watched the first one and I was like, that was fucking boring. And I watched probably 5 minutes of the second one, and then I skipped everyone after that. If there's some crazy story element that I missed, well, whatever. I'm going to put it in C. I could see some other people, you know, maybe rating this game higher if they're into this kind of sort of story. But I think, you know, by halfway through the game, it was pretty much peaked and played out. All right, let's talk about The City That Never Sleeps. This was the DLC for the first Spider-Man game. I count DLC for the challenge if it's more than like 3 or 4 hours. This was pretty cool. I mean, it felt like more of a sequel because there's some story elements with Miles Morales that are important. Just the development of Black Cat and Silver Sable as well. So didn't really do a whole lot more than you would want from a DLC. I'm gonna put it in B category because it's still just a great Spider-Man experience. Let's round out our co-op journey that we did this year. We ended it with Judgment. It was an okay game. I didn't really care for the framing device of them being on this tribunal in the middle of a battle. Why does this general care so much about the only 4 troops he has left not following his orders in the middle of a battle? Like, it didn't make sense. You know, the whole premise of the game didn't really make sense, but it was still fun to go through and play the levels and kind of have this arcade element, taking on different challenges to get more points. It was fun. It feels like a good spin-off, you know, necessary game in the franchise, but for me, it's still a C. Miles Morales. So I was preparing myself for Spider-Man 2, and I really love this game. Miles was a great character. It was awesome to get to know him, what's important to him, and it kind of puts Peter Parker in this new light as like a mentor as well. More so in the second game, actually. This game was great in establishing Miles Morales as a strong, moral character that is worthy of wearing the Spider-Man costume. Peter Parker, I mean, those are big shoes to fill, and I think Miles is definitely worthy of doing that. I love all of the electrical powers that he has. Camouflage thing was really neat as well. I like the use of Prowler. I think there was a lot of elements from this game that were similar enough to the first Spider-Man game, but different enough to make Miles like kind of his own things. Made me fall in love with Miles as a character. Big fan of him now. B category. Okay, let's talk about BioShock 2. I had played BioShock Infinite, I had played BioShock 1, but I never played the second one. Because I had heard, I don't want to say mixed things, but I knew Ken Levine didn't make it. But I had been thinking a lot about the first game, and Rapture as a setting is very interesting. I popped in the second game, and I was actually very surprised with how good it was. I think playing as a Big Daddy was very interesting. How we're using our drill. It explains a lot with the little sisters that the first game doesn't really go into as much. The game was challenging sometimes. I mean, there was definitely some combat sections that got me, on the edge of my seat and kind of rethinking how to configure my character. And BioShock 2 is a definite must play. I don't think the story elements are nearly as strong as 1 or Infinite. This game feels like an expansion to BioShock 1, and I mean that in like the most complimentary way. We'll still put it in B. Spider-Man 2. This was one of my most anticipated games for the year. I was a huge fan of all the games leading up to this. This is more of a Spider-Man 4 than it is a Spider-Man 2. The City That Never Sleeps has enough story to be its own game. Did get our own game with Miles Morales. By the time we get to Spider-Man 2, there has been so much buildup of Peter Parker, of Miles, Harry Osborn, MJ. This is like a huge game story-wise, with Peter Parker, kind of getting the black suit, the influence that has on him, the way they use Miles as sort of this moral compass to pull Peter back to reality, the tragedy of Harry Osborn. I think it's darker than it is in the Sam Raimi films. The way they use Venom, I thought was really, really well done. Whenever this game shifts gears, I think this is one of the best experiences I've played on PS5. Spider-Man 2, close contender for Game of the Year. Not quite as moving as Final Fantasy XVI was. I still think it's an A category. Okay, let's talk about Lies of P. I absolutely adore this game. As time has gone on since I've played it, I think about it still. I think about the weird Pinocchio story that they were telling. It kind of mixed in with this sentient puppet story that's somewhat relevant to the AI discussions going on now. The use of all the different elements from different Souls games, like the parry from Sekiro. We've got sort of the backstep from Bloodborne, and the overall aesthetic of Bloodborne is here. But the flow of combat is slower, very much about blocking, dodging, and big hits with your sword, kind of like Dark Souls 1. It has all of the elements of a Souls game. It feels like a FromSoft game, but it also feels like an original title. I think Lies of P, first true step in making the Souls-like genre a real genre. I think a lot of these other games have really tried and they're just not quite there. And there's something about what Lies of P did. They did the impossible. For me, it's an A tier game. I don't think that it's quite an S tier game or as good as some of the other From Software games, because one big thing I don't really care for is the parry was very tight. Okay, it's not really easy to get these perfect blocks, perfect parries, or perfect guards. And I didn't really think the reward was quite worth it. I never felt like my critical damage was high enough. I know there's some stats that boost that later on, but for as hard as it was to get the staggers, I didn't think it was worth the payoff all the time. But nevertheless, it's one of my favorite games in the year. Cannot wait for the sequel. The way the game ends teases something very exciting. Definitely excited to see more from them. Next up is Resistance Fall of Man. So this was another Insomniac game. I actually have never played any of the Resistance games. I decided to give the first one a shot, and it was very challenging. I found myself beating my head against the wall on this game. It was really hard because the checkpoints are very unforgiving. I think there's maybe 2 or 3 per level. You're not really regenerating health completely. You're having to find health packs, conserve ammo, not really just given ammo for every possible gun you have. You have to be smart. This game was a good mixture of Halo, Call of Duty in a strange way, because it had that World War II aesthetic. Takes place in the early 50s, but then it had the really wild sci-fi kind of gunplay. Enemies reminded me a lot of the enemies in Halo, the way they behaved, so you could tell that they were influenced a lot by Halo. Definitely want to go through the rest of the game. I think this game could definitely use a new coat of paint, some modernization on its checkpoints, because I was pretty frustrated going through it. It probably took me 12 hours. I think if you went in and modernized this a little bit, it'd be more like a 9 hour game and might feel a little bit tighter, better pace. I'm gonna put it in C for now. I think the series does improve from here though, so we'll see as time goes on. Next up, this is an indie title called 1980X. This was something that I just kind of turned on as I was playing around with my Steam Deck. I ended up playing through it in a couple sittings because it was fairly short. What this game is it's a story about a kid who discovers an arcade, and you pretty much just sample 5 different games going back to school. Oh, does she like me? This and that. The story doesn't really matter. Like, it doesn't really go anywhere, which is disappointing because they kind of frame the gameplay experience around it. I feel like it would have been cooler just to like get one or two of these games made into a complete title. Although it is a nice idea to kind of give the player like a sample of these 5 different arcade experiences from the 80s and 90s. They're all executed so well that I wish they would have just made complete games out of all of them. Instead, I feel like we just get this half-baked story, 5 tech demos sprinkled in between. I'm gonna give it a D. I didn't really like it. There was some high-quality craftsmanship there that I want to acknowledge, especially that last game, Kill Screen. I thought that was really cool. It's like this first-person dungeon crawler RPG that was really fast-paced, and I was like, man, if they made a full game of this, I would spend $15 on this. So I don't know what their plan is, but maybe they can make complete games out of some of those ideas. Okay, let's talk about another indie title. This is probably one of the best indie games I've played, maybe ever. What else is there? I don't know. I mean, it's definitely up there with like Shovel Knight and Guacamelee and some of those guys. Vampire Survivors. Fucking addicting, crazy dopamine rush of a game. It's hard to explain. Like, even just watching videos of this game, you're not really going to understand why it's incredible. But you essentially start off as a small little character, very simple graphics. It's like Castlevania NES graphics. All of these enemies start swarming you, and your character is just kind of auto attacking. You're picking up crystals from the enemies you kill and adding more weapons and power-ups, and it's just complete auto attack. Not pressing any buttons, you're not dodging. All you're doing is moving the left stick. It's easy to get lost in. The scale of where your character goes, so unpredictable. When you first start out, this game's very meek and simple. You're like, oh, this is nice. Like, what's going on here? Where it takes you just have to experience it. Everybody needs to play this game. I could recommend this game to almost anybody. It's so simple, so addictive, and it's so fun. So many secrets and unlocks and characters and content they're adding, and the game is only like $5 with all the DLC. I just can't believe the value you get for this little game. It's one of my favorite indie games. It's one of my favorite games that I played this year. It's an S tier game, no doubt about it. Ratchet and Clank Into the Nexus. I did not care for this game. I thought this was another disappointing Ratchet and Clank game. I'm not used to saying, like, I really adore 1, 2, 3, and 4. Big fan of the remake from 2016. Rift Apart was amazing. I thought Tools of Destruction and Quest for Booty were pretty fun games. Into the Nexus fell flat for me in some ways. Into the Nexus just doesn't feel like a complete game. Only a few levels, doesn't really feel necessary. I just don't really care for it. Didn't seem like they needed to make this game. They should have worked on it for a few more years and just made it a complete title. Instead, it feels like half of a Ratchet and Clank game that does not run well at all. They've never re-released this on PS4. Kind of feels like they shat out a Ratchet game, honestly. So for me, it's gonna go in D. Okay, let's talk about Stranger of Paradise. This is a very weird title. I actually really like this game a lot. I know that it's cringy. I know that it's weird. It definitely has some flaws in its writing, but I think it's just so freaking funny and strange, entertaining. The combat is also fantastic. What you're able to do with choosing your different classes and switching between them with the press of a button, you're able to pick like 2 builds that are complementary of each other and then go into missions with it. And you're not locked into any builds whatsoever. Okay, I'm going to be a swordsman for this mission. Now I'm going to be a berserker, or now I'm going to be a mage. And you just pick 2 of those and you swap between them. There's not really much punishment for dying because you level up from just attacking enemies. Souls adjacent, I wouldn't call it a Souls-like. It's cool as a prequel to Final Fantasy, kind of reimagining. Highly recommend it to anyone that's into like really frenetic action games and into Final Fantasy. I will put it in B. Okay, so that was game number 52. I was pretty ecstatic at this point because it was December 1st and I completed 52 games. I had a month left. Maybe I can complete 60 games. I ended up doing 5 more. At this point, I had completed my mission, and this is extra credit. Super Hot. This is an indie title that I got from PlayStation Plus. This is kind of like a puzzle FPS game. You play as a character that time only moves when you move. So you set up these like headshots and dodging bullets and doing all these cool things against these enemies. And it's instant death, so you have to start all the way over, but the levels are really quick and easy. I don't want to say easy, but they were just long enough to be satisfying to set up like the kill run through. Once you're done, it shows everything in real time, which I thought was neat. This was one of those cool like 2-3 hour indie experiences. There seemed to be a lot of modes that unlocked when I was done with it, so I kept it installed. You're not going to get this anywhere else. Definitely check out Super Hot. We'll put it in C. Okay, the next two games are games that I actually have beaten before. For this challenge, I do allow replays of games if they're on platforms I haven't played them on or 100% completed them. In Banjo-Kazooie's case, I had 100% completed it on Nintendo 64, had not done it on the Xbox Live Arcade version. I went and got 100% of the achievements in Banjo-Kazooie. It was amazing. This is one of my favorite games of all time. It was actually the first game that I ever owned on Nintendo 64. Banjo-Kazooie is a wonder to play even today. The music, the level design, like the whimsical characters and just the humor in the game just reminds me of a simpler time when we didn't really take ourselves so seriously and we could just play fun little games like this and have fun, and we weren't so critical of everything. I really love Banjo-Kazooie. It's not something I think could ever be made again, although they're gonna try. It's a one-of-a-kind experience. I put it in A. All right, let's talk about the sequel now, Banjo-Tooie. This is a bit more of a polarizing game. It's much bigger. There's a lot more backtracking. There is a much more darker tone. Like, it's not as funny as the first game. I don't think the music is as memorable either, even though it's really good. I think what it offers is a very challenging experience where Banjo-Kazooie is actually really easy, especially if you've played it multiple times. Banjo-Tooie has a lot of variety, never really doing the same thing twice. It's a lot of fun on a replay once you kind of figure out the flow and the backtracking. Much better on a replay, I think. For me, it's still an A game, but not quite as good as Banjo-Kazooie. We're almost done here. We've got two more. Let's talk about Crimson Land. This is a twin-stick shooter. I think it came out in 2014. It's actually a remake of an older game. I think I was just listening to some podcasts and I just wanted to turn something on. This game gave me a good experience with that. Like, it's just waves of enemies, getting power-ups, using both sticks to shoot the waves of enemies. For this game, I felt like the times that I beat the harder levels are when the RNG was in my favor. So if I got a bunch of bomb power-ups, I was unstoppable. But on the same level, I could get hardly any bomb power-ups and it's impossible to beat. A lot of beating this game, for me anyway, felt like it was dependent on the RNG. Wasn't really that fun to me. It was just kind of a way to pass time. I'm gonna put this in D. And the final game on the list, this is Runner 2. This was a PlayStation Plus title. Turned this game on a few times and played through a few of the worlds. Just one evening I was scrolling through my PS3, saw this game and remembered, oh yeah, turns out I only had, I was probably halfway through it. So I just started playing it and immediately started having fun again. And I was really into how rhythmic the platforming is. Everything is set up to different musical cues. It's a very challenging game, but once you figure out a level and go through it, it can be very satisfying, very rewarding. There's a lot of unlockable content, secret areas and stuff like that, so tons of replay value. I'll put it in the C category. That is going to do it. This was a very rewarding challenge to go through. Here I am. I had just talked about 57 games, mostly all from memory. I had my notes here, but I didn't really, that was just to make sure I was going in the right order. It was awesome. I love gaming. I love video games. Felt good to cross off this many games off the backlog. I gotta tell you, has the feeling that I'm behind and I haven't played as many games as I should have there? Absolutely. It has not gone away. It probably won't go away. So for 2024, I haven't quite decided what I'm going to do, what if I'm gonna go for 52 games again, or I might kind of do what I did in 2022, which is go for more quality over quantity. That is something that, as I got into the dog days of this challenge, as I was cranking through a lot of these C tier games, I was like, all right, man, like I'm ready for like the good of the good. Because in 2022, I played, Sekiro for the first time, Red Dead 2 for the first time, I played Elden Ring for the first time, and Ghost of Tsushima, and just all these great games. There was a lot of great games I played this year. I think the A tier games and B tier games are fantastic. So I'm playing through Wind Waker right now. I have a save file for Persona 3, so I'm not sure what I'm gonna do, but I will be reporting on it. That's the plan, is to make this channel more a part of my gaming hobby and just documenting what I'm playing. I know I upload some videos here and there, but I want to get on camera more and talk to you guys, and maybe talk to some other creators as well that are tackling their backlog. If you've liked what you've seen and if you've stuck it out this far, I love you so much. Please leave a comment, send me a message, subscribe to my channel, because that will encourage me to keep going, because I want to keep doing this stuff. So thank you so much. This is Brody Lowe signing out.